Well, it's very difficult to find any good news about what is going on in Israel and Gaza at this moment in time. But GB News' security editor, Mark White, is there in Tel Aviv. And, Mark, I understand one little piece of good news before we start on the bigger picture is that one of the hostages has been rescued.
Yeah, you're right, Nigel. This is Corporal Ori Megadish, who was abducted by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th. When those attacks took place, she was taken into Gaza and has been held ever since. But an overnight operation by the Israeli Defense Forces managed to rescue her. She's been medically assessed and is in good condition, even to the point where she's been able to meet with members of her family. So clearly delight across Israel at that rare bit of good news. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in his news conference this evening thanked those members of the IDF who launched this rescue operation, and it gives him hope, and he says it should give the families of those hostages being held some hope that there is a chance that the IDF can secure the release of hostages going forward, because there's been real concern among the families of the hostages in Israel that actually the decision to launch this ground war, and that is what we're seeing, not on the scale that we thought with tens of thousands of troops going over the border into Gaza with all of those tanks. It's on a bit of a smaller scale, but it's a ground war nonetheless. They're in Gaza and they're pushing forward incrementally, taking one bit at a time. But, you know, there was concern amongst these families that the start of this ground war could put their loved ones at risk. They wanted quite a few of the hostage families, understandably, to give more time to the negotiations. But that decision actually to launch the ground war was taken by the War Cabinet after they heard back from diplomats, Nigel, who had assessed that the talks between Qatar and Hamas terrorists had stalled, that Hamas was just playing for time to string this out as long as possible, and that's why they took that decision. It's a big risk, but at least the rescue of one hostage shows it can be done.
Well, it shows something can be done, Mark, but my fear that I expressed to you on Thursday was that as the death toll in Gaza mounts and begins in numerical terms to become several times bigger than the numbers of people that died in Israel on October the 7th, you know, I sense in the international community a slight softening of outright support for Israel. And I just wonder, do you think this is perhaps why it's not the all-out assault that we'd expected?
I think that's maybe part of the reason. Also, just how complex the way in which Hamas is embedded into Gaza right throughout the Strip, with hundreds of miles of tunnel systems that they still, even today, continue to fire their rockets at regular intervals from. They still have that capability that has not been degraded really to any significant degree, it seems, by the Israeli military. So that may also be behind the reason why it's more of an incremental approach. But I think you're right, Nigel, in terms of the images coming out of Gaza. I think Israel is alive to that as well, which is why they, at every opportunity, try to remember or try to get people to remember the terrorist attacks on the 7th of October. But we are seeing it already in countries around the world, and even in the UK and the US, there's a softening of the position. They were not for any kind of ceasefire for quite a few days. Now they're talking about humanitarian pauses, and some, including some MPs, are saying that they actually want a ceasefire.
No, they are absolutely. Mark White, great reporting from Tel Aviv as ever. Thank you. And I must say, I am struck, whatever airstrikes the Israelis carry out in Gaza, ultimately, they're going to have to fight in those tunnels. War underground, very, very difficult indeed.